Why do you have to go and pick Fane? Of all the things, your prediction could have been true. It could have been 3-2, but you had to pick Fane and throw away the whole series. Really? Hello and welcome to Vision Denial and Clearing Vision MSI 2023 and the end of the tournament. It was so fun, and if you're watching this, you know, congratulations to Gen.G Gaming. We're going to talk about a couple of things here, how it was very expected these guys were going to be the winner just from the start, from their playoff performance, as well as how successful were Riot, and I mentioned this in the first video of this series, how successful were they at shaking up the meta, as well as how I don't think this format worked as well as people expected. On the surface, great, but I think it lets down some of the other international matchups we could have had. But first, if you're new here, my name is Sam. I've watched every single playoff of every region, asterisk, not for the LEC's winter split for many reasons. And this has helped me go into a better understanding of the teams that are going to come into MSI and know what to expect. And I was largely correct, save for some of the performances that came out of Golden Guardians, Detonation Focus Me, and GAM. And overall, I still make these particular reviews, especially on TikTok. And without further ado, let's take a look at the one that we have for this last little bout of the bracket stage. And we head off into the lower bracket, round 2, G2 Esports versus Bilibili Gaming. And we say goodbye to G2. Hopefully, they'll get better over the summer for their Worlds qualifier at LEC. I say that because, my God, you cannot have 4 straight terrible early games. Hope that Bilibili to fumble harder than a rock and be okay with that performance? You shouldn't be happy with that performance. Now, your first draft was fantastic. Then you opted into harder and harder to execute options because it didn't work out in game 1. Now, I will say, G2, once with the lead, having that in play, know fully well how to end games and choke out a team. But it means nothing if you can't get there to begin with. Bilibili continue to be their worst enemy as their coordination and individual skills are great, but the continuous errors, overconfidence, overzealousness, and by golly, just not enough vision to actually play the style they want makes things so hard for me to just assume they'll get past the next round. On top of that, there was this kind of weird, stubborn refusal to draft a team composition around team fighting, but then in-game, still team fight without the tools that would have been needed in-game. My MVP for this series is Elk, whose damage and uptime still baffle me to this day, but God, Elk cannot be your only consistent player, guys. Fuck. And we're back still with the round 2 lower bracket, Cloud9 versus Gen.G. And we say goodbye to Cloud9, who didn't have much of a chance in the series. Their first game was by far the strongest showing they had. That didn't even break Gen.G's anything. Take away compositions that don't scale or have tools to engage, and we have the same kind of problems that any team have when faced against the coordinated late game behemoth that is Gen.G. You crumble and scatter. Now, Gen.G outperformed in neutrals, coordination, vision play, individual laning, macro choices, map movement, on and on and on and on again. Now, Gen.G may win the next round to hit the lower bracket finals, but that will mostly depend on how Bilibili play than how they will. Because we can count on Gen.G being constant. It's just whether their opponents show up and outplay them is the question. It's quite a mystery. But Gen.G continue to show solid play. And for the first time, just really outperforming even the early game. It's really just nice. My MVP for the series is Peanut, whose map-wide influence and methods in which Blabber was shut down contributed greatly to Gen's pressure on Cloud9. Jovi came to a close second. That last game, 0 deaths. Oh. And it's the upper bracket finals. We got T1 versus Gen.G Gaming. What a series. Really, really, really fun. T1 is the most creative teams in terms of finding win condition angles and new opportunities to exploit a team's weakness. Gen.G Gaming is the best team fighting team in the world. Neither team really played for vision super well unless they had Baron, or played side lane super well, primarily focusing around neutrals and mid lane priority. Neither side really did much to have like a huge snowballing early game. We had 5 straight games of fantastic team fight scenarios, and the better team from that won. Now, T1 put one heck of a fight, the most competitive I think Gen.G Gaming have had to play in a while, leaving them the utmost task of just repeating some success for revenge, just up the lower bracket. But for now, Gen.G Gaming still show they are the team to beat and the team likely to win the whole thing. I may not like some of the shortcomings from Gen.G Gaming, but they have solid drafts, play to their win conditions consistently, and assess things nicely from game to game. My MVP for the series is Knight, who only created winning flanks and engages throughout this series. Like, in one moment he's doing nothing, the next moment he changed the landscape of every team fight. Like, what the heck? And we're in round 3 of the lower bracket. Gen.G versus Bilibili Gaming. And we say goodbye to Gen.G, who just never showed up to the tournament the way we expected them to. A shy, timid, lackluster team whose vision play, neutral setups, and overall coordination just didn't match with the regular season or even playoff performance. It is safe to say that we can be disappointed about Gen.G's performance here at MSI. Bilibili Gaming, on the other hand, continue their streak of gradual improvements. They've had incredible coordination combined with the methods used for Elk and Bin to create split pressure and fights that are excellent. I wished they would use side lane pressures a little bit more often, and that their vision play was deeper to take advantage of the leads they had held across it, instead of just waiting for when the lead is so insurmountable to put that kind of vision. But their vision denial, early game neutrals, and straight up just confidence is excellent. Now, I'm unsure if they'll take one over T1. Both have similar playstyles, at least within this tournament, but it feels a little bit more rough from Bilibili and a little bit more refined in T1. I don't know which I prefer yet. Either way, we're going to get an interesting rematch for the grand finals, and my MVP of the series is Bin, just for the way he controlled space and dominated Doran, and just in general was a nuisance that Gen.G didn't know how to handle. I could give it to Elk, but he keeps doing so much damage. It's just expected. Is that? Yeah, it's just expected. And we're off in the losers finals. T1 versus Bilibili Gaming. And we say goodbye to T1, who in this final series was less proactive than expected and got fairly thrashed about. Both sides played better vision than usual, were less reckless than usual, and much slower than usual. The one time T1 played about the tempo we'd expect, they won rather quickly. I wonder if what would have happened in the series if either or both teams had opted into a more aggressive tempo. Regardless, T1 opting to scale with Bilibili led them to thinking they could out-team fight, and this day, they disagreed super hard and out-skill checked every role on this squad. Bilibili took an understanding of their win conditions and doubled down at all cost, really properly prioritizing and with their target selections, and just the priority was really there. I wish that Bilibili won't take necessarily this approach of late game scaling when it comes to facing off Gen.G, because quite frankly, I don't believe they can team fight them in the late game with such an overlap in style. But who knows? It's not like they can lose 4 times to Gen.G, right? regardless of that, Bilibili showed an impressive amount of improvement with just series after series. It's become a much cleaner team, and I'm less likely to think that they'll be their worst enemy next series. My MVP of this series is Elk, whose presence alone caused T1 to panic and overforce a lot of engages. It's the grand finals of MSI 2023. Not only a rematch within this tournament, but a rematch of the grand finals of the LPL, which is a rematch of that earlier season LPL, which is a rematch of a best of 3, and all 5 of all those matchups still go the way of Gen.G Gaming against BLG. And quite honestly, congratulations to Gen.G Gaming on being the 2023 MSI champions. This was fully expected, quite honestly, for at least a good chunk of viewers, and at least to me. Bilibili played solidly for 3 out of 4 of those games with better vision play, clever win conditions that were approached consistently with individual leads that were nicely accrued all in the early game. But not enough pressure was applied, and those games were lost to a strong set of coordination out of Gen.G Gaming. That and Game 3 being completely thrown to the garbage with the Vayne pick. To me, that's what really made the series fully belong to Gen.G Gaming. Now, Gen.G for their part struggled with side lane control, consistent neutral setups, and sometimes with the laning phase, but they never faltered in their coordination, late game neutral approaches, and especially their drafting, never giving into styles they couldn't succeed in or even overplaying something complicated when they would just outplay at all turns with a simpler composition. All that's to say is that if this gets refined as a playstyle over summer, we'll have a crazy team to meet at Worlds. My MVP for the series is hard to pick, as all of them played to just another degree compared to everybody else. But Knight held more map pressure than any player this series and provided so much space for the team to succeed. Can't wait to see what this team does in summer. So yeah, there goes the last of the tournament. I mentioned we were going to be talking about why I was pretty certain about how Gen.G Gaming was going to be the team to succeed. And it came down primarily to their coordination and team fighting. The meta having not been shaken up at all, or not been shaken up enough, because I do think that they did enough shaking up to be fresh and inspiring, but it wasn't enough to change the overall outlook of how teams approach the game. And Gen.G Gaming being the best team fighting team in the world, and it looked like that in LPL, and it looked even more like that during MSI. Late game team fights were the all and all for how these games were going to go. And because they never faltered on drafting specifically for late game team fights, better coordination, frontline engage, and making sure that Ruler had the space to deliver enough damage and or Knight, depending on who was ahead at the time, you end up with a recipe for success compared to many of the other teams who either had better side lane control, and so they were creative around that aspect, or they had better vision approach or better neutrals early game, and so they were usually focused around getting leads early in, but then they would falter and stall late game and not be able to apply the same kind of pressure. Or teams who had very good team fighting controls, but their macro was not quite there, or their decision making was not quite there, and so there was this lack of consistency and coordination across the board. And you have all these teams who just didn't have enough to play the late game team fight, that no matter how well they outskilled Gen.G Gaming in anything else, there was no way they're going to beat them on that front. And Bilibili and T1 showed a process in which it was possible, but that was either they had controlled such an aggressive early lead that there was nothing that could be done, or it was off of a random rogue fight that just was out of nowhere. Do I think this is going to serve them well going into summer and Worlds? No. Meta changes fairly largely over across 2-3 months that I do not think that their coordination is going to be enough to last them all the way to Worlds or even win Worlds. There has to be some improvement across, especially their vision and their early game neutrals, which is a little bit shaky. But otherwise, they have a strong head start, and I have zero doubts they're going to make it through. So, here's to say, I really hope they do make it at least to their playoffs, and that that they'll improve on some of those weaker aspects. But otherwise, this was the expected win. But I can honestly see why other people have expected Bilibili to make the entire route, because they've been improving incredibly well. T1 with their comeback going into it and their success internationally could have made a comeback to MSI. Gen.G having had such a strong showing in their playoffs. Those three teams were great contenders for it, but not quite enough. Which leads to my second topic, which I alluded to already, was did they shake up enough in the meta? And I think yes, kind of. There was a shakeup enough to change the monotonous Sichuani, Vi, Wukong to come over and over with an occasional Viego. And so the fact that the jungle pool did widen on its regular basis didn't widen it enough for there to be a change in the overall landscape of how the game was approached. And I think it's fine. They may have failed in succeeding into changing how the game was going to be approached, but but I think that is better off for the tournament overall. I don't think that international tournaments should have such a wildly different meta from their playoff counterparts, because we've seen what that looks like, right? The Kali rework when it happened in, I believe it was 2018, or the Lilia that came in with that same year. Many different like new champions coming in or reworks that completely change everything do create a damper on the expected results, and not just the expected results, but the integrity of the competition. And to that, I think, Riot, good job. You didn't screw it up. Solid. You may not have done what you wanted, but you did exactly what you needed to do. So great. That said, I don't think this tournament format I liked. Now, you may be asking, why didn't you like the tournament format? Okay. First and foremost, this tournament format was to create more international matchups. Did it succeed in doing that? No. Any given particular team in the previous formats that MSI held would have had, at minimum, 3 international matchups, 3 different regions they faced. The teams that lost not only played fewer games, but had less international matchups. 2 international matchups for some of them. And even if they won, JD Gaming, for example, had 1 international matchup. They started in the upper bracket. Sorry, they had 2 international matchups. They started in the upper bracket, faced off against a European team, wound up facing against an LPL team, no longer an international matchup, faced off against a Korean team, and then another LPL team. That's 2 international matchups, as is compared to what could have been them facing up to 4, maybe 5 international matchups previously. And it didn't even wind up giving some of the weaker teams more games to play. It gave them fewer games. How does that work? This looks better on paper. The optics of this means that it seems like it's more competitive, but it gives less of an opportunity for international teams to actually shine and show what they're about. Like, Dead Nation Focus Me got 4 games instead of 6, which was what they would have had regularly. More time to develop and build off of things. More time to play against other regions and show what they are like. GAM is the same thing. Like, they played 5 games instead of 6. That's fewer games overall. We got more best of 5s. We got more best of 3s, technically. But many teams got fewer games and fewer matchups. I cannot stress how I think this is an overall failure on the spirit of what international tournaments are supposed to be. It looked fun. It was fun. Must feel terrible for all of the losing teams to go there and not actually get the chance to show who they are compared to everyone else, and only show who they are against maybe 2 regions at best. Well, that was the end of MSI. I've got my cake like I usually have. It's like 10 in the morning here. And personally, I enjoyed this tournament. I think this is still the tournament that showed the most accurate win expectation, but only once we hit the bracket stage. And I think it showed a lot of the more satisfying wild moments and chaotic moments. A lot of the teams still got some of their storylines in, and it was fun to see the likes of like the Golden Guardians playing way better than expected. G2 make some of their comebacks when they were faltering pretty hard in spring, and they were only barely making it through to the playoffs, and then questions around it. I really like that T1 made their mark and proved that, yes, they are still a threat internationally and should be taken seriously. I severely enjoyed just the whole front of it, even with my gripes that I mentioned. This was a good tournament. I say probably one of the more fun ones since the 2021 Worlds tournament. That was incredible to watch. So, hats off to you, Riot. Hats off to everyone that participated. And I would love to see every single team that was here to come back at Worlds, plus the others that like really made a competition for them. But those are at least my thoughts from it all. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Or some of the teams that represented you. Did they do well? Are you disappointed? Would you expected more? And do you agree with me about some of the formatting and like the meta changes? I'd love to hear all of that. It will be a while before I come back when summer playoffs roll back around. Or in the case of the LEC, when their world qualifier happens, because I'm not watching their actual summer playoff for the same reasons as the winter one. But without further ado, thank you very much, and I'll see you all for the summer playoffs.